here we are with the pedal board, and I'll take a moment to show you what all this stuff is here for and how I've got things wired up. Different folks approach boards all kinds of different ways, and the way that I'm running this and is fairly commonplace is when you're using a germanium fuzz. Fuzzes like to be first in the signal chain. So this one right here, it's the MJM London Fuzz. He builds beautiful sounding stuff. And I've got the guitar cable going straight out of the Stratocaster right into that. Even though there is a wah-wah pedal over here and there's other stuff on this side, my signal flow, it's just going Strat right into the London Fuzz. And a lot of times when I don't use a pedal board at all, I'll just go a Strat into a fuzz into an amp. At least Michael Bloomfield said that's how Hendrix was running his rig when he was playing at Cafe Wah. He said he had just a Strat and a fuzz face and a twin reverb. So sometimes that's all you need. I mean, this is a little decadent here today, but I wanted to show you how all this stuff works together, and Jimi was certainly an innovator, creative use of effects and things like that. So I'm hitting the fuzz first, the germanium fuzz first, and I've got my volume rolled back a bit right now. But out of the fuzz, out of the London Fuzz, I'm going then into the Roger Mayo wah-wah, into the Vision wah. So I got things set pretty clean right now. And the reason I'm doing that is, number one, so that the guitar hits the fuzz first, but secondly, I've got a couple different options here. If you run a wah-wah before or after a fuzz, they're two very different sounds. And, folks will say that Jimi used, and there's so much information out there, you kind of got to do your own research and find out what really is the case, but Jimi used his wah before his fuzz. So if I go guitar into the wah-wah first, into the London Fuzz, it screws up the London Fuzz. There's a buffer circuit in the wah-wah. The fuzz likes to be first. That's why you've got to experiment. But going out of the fuzz into the wah-wah, then when I come out of the wah-wah, I'm going into this orange guide, and that's the Roger Mayer Axis Fuzz. It's a silicon transistor instead of the germanium. So what that gives me, and it's a harsher sound, what that gives me is it gives me a wah-wah before a fuzz, which is really the Hendrix thing. So that way I've got the sound of having the wah before fuzz without screwing up the germanium fuzz right here. So all that stuff really impacts your sound. I'm patching everything with George L's cables. I like them. I've been through a lot of cables, and these are the ones that I like the sound of. Cables do impact your tone considerably, especially when you're stringing a lot of stuff together. Some guys will do elaborate setups with true bypass loops and all that, and I do some of that, although I had to take my looper off because I didn't have space on the pedal board today once all this was on here. But realistically speaking, I normally don't run through all this all at once. Everything you put between the guitar and the amp theoretically it's something in between the guitar and the amp, and that can negatively impact your sound. It can make it not quite as pure, but with good cable and short cable runs and stuff like that, you're generally all right. So I'm going germanium fuzz into wah-wah, back into Axis Fuzz, and then I'm going out of the Axis Fuzz into the Voodoo Vibe. And that's the Univibe, but it's also got a great vibrato circuit in it. It's also got a great tremolo in it if I want to run it as a tremolo pedal. And then I'm going out of the Voodoo Vibe into the Blue Collar, the regular one. If you've been following me through this Blue series, I use that pedal as a regular overdrive all the time. So that will give me the vibe before the overdrive, which some guys will want to run their vibe pedals before a dirt. And that's the way I find that this works best. I just find that I prefer the sound when I experiment with what comes first and what comes later. But having all this other stuff here before, it also allows me, running it that way, to have a fuzz before a vibe or an overdrive. Let's see, it's another shade of dirt after the vibe. So do I want dirt before vibe, in which case I've got something like this? Or do I want dirt after the vibe? And if we weren't, if I wasn't trying to cover so much in a relatively short period of time, I would actually patch this a little differently and show you what the blue collar is like the other way around, what that sounds like before the vibe. But I've experimented extensively with the board over many, many years, and that's the way I just like to run it. So I'm running the vibe before the blue collar. So there's that, and then I'm going out of the blue collar, and that is hitting the Roger Mayer octavia. I think he originally called it the Octavio, but that's the secret. That's the secret gadget. That's the solo to Purple Haze. It's the intro to One Rainy Wish. Jimi uses a lot of great octavia work all over the place. You can listen to the Electric Ladyland album, and so out of the octavia, which briefly, here's what the octavia does. It's not quite a true octave doubling pedal, but it puts a high frequency on top that is. When you go to like different intervals, like fourths, it does this cool thing. It adds in like. This big bottom end just comes in. I guess when I play a fifth. The thing with the octavia, there's a lot to say about that, but I believe that Jimi ran his octavias after his fuzzes, which allowed him to drive the octavia earlier in the signal chain. And you can experiment, Roger says this on his website, you can experiment with how much signal you're feeding into the octavia, but generally you want a very mellow tone to get the octavia to really respond, and it's very touch sensitive. So if you go to your neck pickup and your Strat, and even if you roll your tone down on the guitar, here that upper frequency really just starts to come out. Whereas if I got like all treble pickup and all my tones up, it's not quite the same. So you can drive it with the, let's say like a germanium fuzz. Next on my list is a germanium from Roger. I love Michael's stuff too. But so here we are. This is like a driving that, turn on my Octavia. I mean, and I'm not going through a closed back, a Marshall Plexi or anything. These are not, don't hold me to totally period correct tones here, but loosely, this is definitely how I'm running my board and a bit of how Jimi, at least reportedly, had his stuff set up. So Octavia is after the fuzzes. And so to recap, I've got London Fuzz, Germanium Fuzz first, Strat into London Fuzz, into my wah-wah, back into my Axis Fuzz. So I've got here the wah-wah before the fuzz. It's got that sound. Out of the Axis, into the Voodoo Vibe, the Univibe clone, into my Blue Collar Overdrive, into the Octavia. And then after that, I've just got time-based effects at the very end, which is good practice. So I'm going out of the Octavia into the El Capistan, the Strymon, and not really much to say at all about the Strymon. It's a beautiful sounding delay pedal. And I'm a vintage snob, and I'm a tone snob, and I've got a real tube tape delay that I adore. And echo plexus are the coolest thing in the world to me, but the El Capistan even brought me over from being fiercely anti-digital. So it sounds like tape to me. So it's going out of the El Capistan into last on, which I hardly ever even use, just the TC Electronic Hall of Fame, and it's just a It's to have a reverb pedal on the board somewhere in case I really need it. I just didn't bother to take it off of the board when I was setting this up for you here today to show you what all this stuff does. But generally, I would leave reverb to the recording chain. Also, depending on what kind of room you're playing in doing live gigs, a lot of times you don't really need the reverb pedal, but I got it on there. So that's everything. And other than that right over here is just my power supply. So it's a lot to say about power supplies, but it's a little beyond the scope of what I wanted to cover here right now. So you're just trying to get clean power to your pedals. Some of these I have battery powered. Some of these I'm running off the power supply. So the blue collar, I'm sagging the voltage down to I think like 6.78 volts. I like the sound of kind of like dying batteries in overdrives. It sweetens them up to my ears. Or I'm sorry, I'm sagging the London Fuzz is what I'm sagging. But anyhow, that's what this is all about. That's how I've got it set up, and we'll talk more about how I'm using all this in these examples as we get into the lesson by lesson instruction. But you certainly don't need all of this in order to start learning some of Jimi's tunes, familiarizing yourself with the style, getting the stuff under your fingertips. I keep saying it over and over again, but if it's not here in your fingertips, none of this crap matters. Okay? So it's got to be in your hands and in your heart before it's cool to have a univibe, or before it's cool to I want a germanium versus a silicone sounding fuzz, and all that stuff. But this is just here as part of the creative process, but definitely don't ever confuse it with the totality of the creative process. Like, Jimi didn't need all that stuff, and any great guitar player shouldn't need it. It comes into your life when you're ready for it, and there's a valid use for it. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead with the rest of the lesson here.